The Bering Strait is narrow enough to look simple and remote enough to be ignored by people far from the Arctic. This combination is exactly why it deserves attention. Between Alaska and Russia, the strait links the Pacific with the Arctic Ocean, placing two major powers across a cold and difficult passage. For most of the modern shipping era, ice, weather, darkness, distance, and limited infrastructure kept this region at the edge of world trade imagination. But an edge can become a hinge when climate, shipping technology, military interest, and resource competition begin to move at the same time. The Bering Strait isn't becoming the next Suez Canal. This comparison is too simple. Its importance comes from a different issue. The Arctic may become more active before it becomes easy. More activity in a hard environment produces leverage for whoever can monitor, rescue, regulate, escort, and respond. The first channel is geography. Ships using Arctic routes between the Pacific and the Arctic has to reckon with the Bering Strait as a gateway. There remains no wide set of equivalent passages spread across the region. One vessel entering or leaving the Arctic from the Pacific side concentrates through a narrow maritime space with harsh conditions. The second channel is infrastructure scarcity. Compared with major temperate shipping routes, the region has fewer deep ports, fewer repair options, fewer response assets, and more difficult communications. One ship in trouble near a busy port can expect a very different response than a ship in trouble in Arctic waters. Distance gets pulled into risk. The third channel is environmental consequence. One accident in cold, remote waters is harder to contain and harder to clean. Oil, fuel, cargo, or hazardous material incidents can threaten ecosystems and communities that depend on the sea. This gives the route a moral and political weight beyond commercial efficiency. This Bering Strait is also a security space. Russian territory and American territory face each other across the region, while China has shown growing interest in Arctic routes and polar access. As Arctic navigation becomes more discussed, the strait gets pulled into a larger question about surveillance, Coast Guard presence, naval awareness, and rules of passage. That doesn't mean every ship is a crisis. This means traffic can no longer be treated as background noise. That route's future depends on ice, but not only on ice. Even with less sea ice, Arctic shipping still faces storms, fog, limited daylight in parts of the year, changing ice conditions, uncertain charts, insurance caution, and a shortage of emergency infrastructure. One shorter route on paper can become a more demanding route in practice. This is the Arctic paradox. That distance can shrink while operational difficulty remains high. For shipping companies, the question is more than whether an Arctic route is shorter. That question is whether the savings outweigh ice-class vessel requirements, escort needs, schedule uncertainty, port limitations, insurance costs, and political risk. For governments, the question is broader. Who sets the rules? Who responds to an accident? Who tracks vessels moving through the gateway? Who shields communities and ecosystems while strategic competition intensifies? Those questions make the Bering Strait a choke point before it becomes crowded like the world's busiest lanes. One choke point can matter because traffic is already huge. It may also matter because future traffic, limited response, and geopolitical proximity combine in one narrow place. This Bering Strait belongs to the second category. Its pressure is perspective, but it isn't imaginary. The Arctic is already present in defense strategies, shipping studies, environmental planning, and great power signaling. What shifts over time is the number of actors who treat the region as an operational space rather than an icy margin. That shift gives the strait strategic gravity. Small governance choices today may shape how the corridor works later. Traffic lanes, areas to be avoided, communication procedures, search and rescue agreements, port investments, and environmental safeguards all get pulled into the future route's character. When they are built early, the region can absorb activity with less chaos. When they lag behind traffic growth, the first major incident could define the politics of the strait for years. That local dimension is essential. Indigenous communities around the Bering region aren't scenery in a global shipping story. They live with the environmental risk, marine mammal patterns, subsistence activity, and emergency consequences that outside planners can underestimate. One route that looks efficient from a headquarters may look fragile from a coastal village. That mismatch can produce conflict over who benefits and who bears the risk. That Bering Strait therefore forces a different kind of geopolitical analysis. It isn't enough to ask whether trade will increase. We have to ask whether governance, infrastructure, and community protection can grow at the same pace. Without that, the route becomes a symbol of access without capacity. Military interest adds another layer. As more states watch the Arctic, the ability to track vessels, enforce rules, and communicate intentions becomes more important. A Coast Guard cutter, a radar installation, an icebreaker, or a rescue aircraft can have strategic meaning without firing a shot. Presence becomes reassurance, and absence becomes vulnerability. That strait also sits near a boundary between cooperation and competition. Safe navigation and environmental protection benefit all users. At the same time, the surrounding powers may distrust each other's motives. This means the route can require cooperation precisely when politics make cooperation harder. The commercial future is uncertain, but uncertainty doesn't make the strait irrelevant. It makes planning more important. When Arctic routes grow slowly, the region still needs safety rules for rising traffic. When routes grow quickly, the lack of preparation becomes more dangerous. If geopolitical tension climbs, the same narrow waterway becomes a place where routine movement may be interpreted as signaling. The Bering Strait isn't a shortcut story. It remains a readiness story. The problem is whether a gateway between oceans can be managed before climate and competition turn it into a crowded strategic corridor. That is why maps alone can mislead. They show the narrow water, but they don't show the rescue distance, the limited ports, the weather window, the community risk, the insurance hesitation, or the strategic suspicion. Those invisible factors are what make the strait important. That future of Arctic shipping may not arrive as one dramatic moment. It can arrive in increments, a few more voyages, a new route test, a patrol, a port investment, a joint exercise, a study warning about risk. Every increment makes the gateway more relevant. Everyone also tests whether the systems around the gateway are catching up. That final lesson is that the Bering Strait is powerful because it is both narrow and unfinished. Its geography is fixed, but its rules, infrastructure, and political meaning are still being written. That is the point where leverage forms. Not in a fully mature corridor, but in a corridor before the world has agreed how it should work. The Bering Strait's future is often discussed as if melting ice automatically produces a shipping revolution. This is the wrong starting point. Less ice can open possibilities. But possibilities aren't the same as dependable corridors. One shipping lane becomes useful only when the surrounding system can support repeated movement under commercial pressure. The Arctic system is still difficult, expensive, and unevenly prepared. This is why the strait's importance may grow before traffic becomes routine. A narrow gateway can attract strategy long before it holds traffic comparable to the world's warm water choke points. That first reason is control of awareness. In remote waters, knowing what is moving can be as important as moving something yourself. Vessel tracking, radar coverage, aerial patrols, communications, and ice information get pulled into sovereignty and safety. A ship that would be ordinary near Singapore can turn into a monitored event near the Bering Strait if the surrounding context is tense. The second reason is rescue time. Arctic incidents punish distance. One mechanical failure, medical emergency, grounding, or spill may require help from far away under poor weather and limited daylight. This turns emergency response into a strategic capability. One state that can respond quickly has influence. A state that can't respond may watch an accident become a diplomatic and environmental crisis. The third reason is rule setting. Traffic lanes, protected areas, reporting requirements, ice navigation rules, and environmental safeguards shape how the route will behave. If these rules are clear and respected, activity can grow with less friction. If rules are contested or under-enforced, each voyage can hold political suspicion. That makes the Bering Strait a governance choke point, not just a geographic one. That local environment adds stakes that a pure trade analysis would miss. Marine mammals, fisheries, subsistence practices, and coastal communities can be affected by noise, pollution, traffic patterns, and the risk of accidents. One route that saves time for a distant cargo owner may impose risk on people who did not choose the route. This distribution of benefit and danger is politically sensitive. It means Arctic shipping can't be judged only by distance saved between ports. It has to be judged by the readiness of the entire corridor to handle consequences. That strait also complicates great power narratives. Russia has the largest Arctic coastline and a developed interest in the Northern Sea route. The United States has Alaska, Coast Guard responsibilities, and defense concerns in the same region. China describes itself as a near-Arctic stakeholder and has shown interest in polar shipping and science. Those positions don't automatically produce confrontation, but they do make the gateway more watched. A fishing patrol, research vessel, icebreaker, or Coast Guard transit can hold more meaning than the vessel type suggests. Strategic suspicion can attach itself to plain maritime activity. This is one reason the Arctic needs channels of communication before traffic becomes crowded. That region also lacks the dense support network of older trade arteries. There are fewer nearby repair yards, fewer large ports, fewer tug assets, fewer hospitals, and fewer places for a ship to recover from a mistake. Commercial shipping is comfortable with risk when the risk is understood and priced. This is less comfortable when a small error can become expensive because help is distant. Insurance and classification requirements will therefore shape the route's growth. A shorter voyage may not be cheaper if the ship has to meet higher standards, wait for ice windows, hire specialized support, or accept uncertain schedules. That is why some Arctic forecasts should be read carefully. One route can be physically possible and commercially limited at the same time. One pilot voyage can prove feasibility without proving a mature market. One few successful transits can attract attention without replacing established corridors. The Bering Strait sits inside that gap between possibility and system readiness. Its strategic value grows because states plan for what could become important, not only for what is already crowded. This planning can take constructive forms. Better charts, shared safety systems, search and rescue coordination, environmental response plans, and community consultation all lower risk. It may also take competitive forms. More patrols, more surveillance, more military exercises, and stronger claims over route governance can lift tension. That same narrow gateway can therefore invite cooperation and competition at once. That dual nature isn't unusual in geopolitics, but the Arctic makes it sharper. Harsh geography punishes neglect. Strategic rivalry punishes naivety. The Bering Strait forces states to avoid both dangers. For commercial operators, the central question will remain reliability. Can a vessel count on the route often enough to justify investment? Can delays be predicted? Can insurance be secured at a price that preserves the advantage of shorter distance? Can cargo owners accept the uncertainty of a route that may still be seasonal, specialized, and politically watched? Those questions determine whether the strait becomes a niche corridor, a strategic contingency route, or something larger. For local communities, the central question is consent and protection. Will increased traffic bring resources for monitoring and emergency response? Will outside actors listen to local knowledge about weather, wildlife, and risk? Will economic opportunity be shared, or will the region mainly receive the hazard? A serious Arctic strategy has to include those questions because geography is inhabited, not empty. That Bering Strait is therefore a test of maturity. It asks whether global shipping can enter a sensitive region without treating it as an empty shortcut. It asks whether governments can prepare institutions before traffic forces the problem. It asks whether environmental safeguards can hold pace with commercial curiosity. And it asks whether great powers can manage proximity without turning every movement into a signal of hostility. The answer isn't fixed. This strait's physical geography is old, but its geopolitical role is still forming. This makes today's planning unusually important. Rules written early can lower future friction. Infrastructure built early can prevent future tragedy. Relationships established early can make routine traffic less suspicious. When those pieces are missing, the region may learn through crisis instead of preparation. This is the danger behind the Arctic Gateway. That Bering Strait may become strategically important not because it suddenly becomes easy, but because it remains hard while more actors want to use it. Hard routes produce dependence on capable institutions. Where institutions are thin, leverage appears. This world's coldest corridors may therefore teach the same lesson as the busiest warm-water straits. Geography is only the beginning. The real power lies in who can hold the route usable when the environment, the market, and the politics all become difficult at once. One useful way to think about the Bering Strait is to separate navigation from normalization. Navigation means a vessel can pass. Normalization means enough vessels can pass often enough that companies, insurers, communities, and governments treat the route as routine. That Arctic is moving toward more navigation, but normalization is a harder threshold. Routine shipping requires rescue confidence, port services, repair options, predictable rules, and trusted information about ice and weather. Without those systems, every voyage remains more exceptional than the map suggests. That exceptional quality gives the strait strategic attention before it becomes commercially plain. States plan around rare but consequential routes because rare use can still matter in a crisis. A specialized cargo, a military support movement, an icebreaker deployment, or a research mission can hold geopolitical meaning in a place where traffic is sparse. Sparse traffic makes each movement more visible. Visibility can produce caution or suspicion, especially when the surrounding states are already watching each other closely. That is why transparency mechanisms matter in the Arctic. Clear reporting, shared safety standards, and communication channels can prevent routine activity from being interpreted too aggressively. The environmental stakes also argue for preparation before volume climbs. Cold water cleanup is difficult and response windows can be narrow. One accident involving fuel or hazardous cargo could harm ecosystems and coastal livelihoods in ways that are hard to reverse. That risk shifts the moral calculus of shortcut shipping. One company may benefit from saving distance, while local communities may absorb a disproportionate share of the danger. If that imbalance is ignored, political resistance to route growth can climb. That strait's future, therefore, depends on legitimacy as well as navigability. Legitimacy comes from consultation, protection, credible emergency capacity, and rules that aren't written only for distant commercial users. It also comes from acknowledging that Arctic geography isn't an empty corridor waiting for world trade. It remains a lived environment with memory, livelihood, and ecological fragility. Great power competition can easily overshadow that reality, but it can't erase it. That Bering Strait's most important future may be decided by whether strategic planners can hold all of these layers together. Shipping efficiency, military awareness, environmental risk, and local protection aren't separate files. They meet in the same narrow water. This is what makes the gateway so demanding. It is more than a passage between oceans. It is a test of whether the world can build governance before access outpaces responsibility. The Arctic Gate may never seem like the classic choke points of warmer seas. It doesn't need to. When more ships, more states, and more strategic expectations gather around one remote passage, the Bering Strait will shape decisions far beyond